Well, hello and welcome. We are coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. You're watching the Week in Review with myself, Liesl Wilson, where we take a look at some of those top stories making headlines this week. Oh, on that note, let's take a look at what we can expect for today. Well, to the COP27 meetings taking place in Egypt, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the world is not on track to capping carbon emissions to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial revolution levels. Now, he's warned of the serious implications of climate change in the face of higher global temperatures, with the African continent, amongst other global regions, set to suffer more floods and droughts, and the impacting social consequences as a result. Our SABC News anchor Nompumelelo Siziba tracked some of the issues that came out of this week's meetings.
The 27th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties talk started on Sunday, the 6th of November, with the formal opening taking place on Monday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres didn't mince his words when he said the world was on a course to climate hell. That's because carbon emissions are rising, not declining.
UNEP published a report just a couple of days ago saying very clearly that there is no clear plan to cap global warming in and around 1.5 degrees. This is because coal usage for energy has increased. China has increased its number of coal-powered plants, India as well. Germany obviously restarting some power plants following the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
This week saw President Ramaphosa present South Africa's Just Energy Transition Partnership investment plan to the world. It's an $8.5 billion deal funded by the United States, Germany, France, the UK and the EU. The funding is set to go towards electricity infrastructure through the use of renewable energy, the establishment of an electric car manufacturing base and new green hydrogen projects. However, President Ramaphosa said in reality, the country would need around 1.5 trillion rand to fully effect the energy transition over the next 20 years. One energy observer says the latest Just Energy Transition deal and more to follow will burden South Africans with generational debt.
If you do an analysis of what the so-called grants and funding entails, 97% of the so-called funding is loans. And you and I know that you don't need to be a genius to work out that the 3% donation is probably built into the interest rate on the 97% loans. So there's no free lunch in this game. And the fact of the matter is it will take at least 10 years to put 10 gigawatts or more of power into the grid, renewable energy.
Private sector players have welcomed the new deal, saying that this will help to incentivize the private sector to also invest in reducing the country's carbon footprint. And note that work has already begun to invest in areas like renewable energy.
What we're seeing now is a really big acceleration around corporates and big corporate clients and manufacturing clients, mines, all looking to go off-grid. And to an extent, it's because we've been forced to, because we can't rely on Eskom. But at the same time, it's having the impact of reducing emissions.
Some argue that it makes little sense to rush to an energy transition when battery technology, which is needed to back up renewable energy, has yet to mature as an industry.
If you want to do a just transition, you need to do it properly over time. You can't do what the Rater and Eskom is doing now, switching off deliberately available coal power. I mean, Komati is currently in its decrepit state because it hasn't been maintained. It's got an energy availability factor, the last unit that they switched off, an energy availability factor of 65%. It's 3 times higher than the best renewable technology, 3 times higher, and it's available 24/7. So, it doesn't make sense to crash the South African economy because you've got this ideology that you now want to play good boy, bad boy, close the coal stations down, and immediately jump over to unproven storage capacity, which is supposed to back up renewable technology.
In the meantime, the hustle and bustle at COP27 continues. The big sticking point now is whether developed nations will agree to developing nations' demands for a loss and damage category of funds. This is essentially mature countries accepting responsibility for the carbon emissions they've made over the centuries and the climate change events that consequently impact economically weaker countries who have to rebuild basic infrastructure, usually a cost they can ill afford. Nampumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, for more on this, let's bring in academic and legal expert Dr. Maria Olieju. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Maria. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC.
Thank you for having me.
Let's look at what's transpired this week. Many themes emerging. We heard President Cyril Ramaphosa also presenting South Africa's plan. Perhaps you could talk to the importance of climate financing so that African nations can transit to climate resilient infrastructure and embrace renewable energy at large.
Climate adaptation financing basically refers to funds that aim to help countries manage the impacts of climate change, transit to lower carbon economies, and develop climate resilient infrastructure. In African countries, however, there has been the adaptation finance gap, which refers to the difference between the cost of adapting to climate change and the funds that are actually available to help them adapt. Financing is very crucial because becoming climate resilient is not cheap. Most African countries are, however, heavily indebted and they have pressing development needs. Therefore, they need financing to become climate resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the back of that, I mean, today, just looking at the effects of climate change on infrastructure, perhaps on trade and food security, how would you weigh in on that effect to date, given the severity of the problem?
Right. In recent years, the consequences of climate change on economic infrastructure in Africa has become more evident. Its impacts are stronger on agriculture, negatively impacting trade and food security. This is due to the continent's geographical position and its limited ability to adapt to climate change. Africa, despite being the lowest contributor to global warming, is the most at risk to it. For example, extreme weather events such as flooding has repeatedly wreaked havoc on transport networks across the continent. These events have, led to extensive structural damage, which hampers the flow of goods and services between rural areas and cities. This impacts the informal economy, not to even mention the collateral damage that comes in terms of development. As many communities on the continent are agricultural reliant, this is clearly a problem. There is therefore the need for African countries to transit to climate resilient infrastructure. This is essential, in my view, to drive sustainable growth and development.
All right, so Dr. Maria, on that note, you've explored this in your works, and I wonder if you could speak to the types of infrastructure then that is required to manage this. I mean, last year we saw horrific scenes emerging in South Africa during the KZN floods, as well as the Eastern Cape province due to adequate planning and infrastructure.
Right. So I think we need to build infrastructure that can withstand extreme weather, higher air and water temperatures, flooding, etc. Right. So I think the government needs to invest in engineering research that will lead to new infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of climate change. There is also the need to upgrade existing infrastructure, such as transport systems, so that they can become climate resilient. It is also essential that the government find cost-effective ways of regularly maintaining existing infrastructure so that they stay climate resilient.
So themes, surrounding accountability and responsibility and even consequence management seems to have come to the fore as well so far during COP27. And calls for more financing really requires a balancing act. And I wonder if you could talk to us about the enormous responsibility that ultimately comes with, the management of sovereign debt as we heard in the package, sovereign debt's intergenerational. And if it becomes unsustainable and we default, there are obviously dire consequences for that for generations to come. How would you weigh in on this, also given the fact that developing nations, want developed nations to accept responsibility for the dire situation the world finds itself in?
That is a very good point that you are making. It is essential that African governments have solid public debt management plans in place so that their debt does not become unsustainable. In South Africa's case, that would be the National Treasury having such a plan in place. Debt management plans are important because many countries coming out of the pandemic have accumulated much debt due to higher social welfare costs, higher healthcare expenditure, tax relief, and so on in responding to the pandemic. Many nations also received various loans from development banks, including South Africa. Therefore, we have a situation where many countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change, they are already heavily indebted, yet they need climate finance to adapt to climate change. This is a point that was voiced by developing countries at COP27 this week. President Ramaphosa, in addition to calling on developed countries to make good on their climate finance pledges to developing countries, also made the point that climate financing should take the form of more grants than loans. This is a point that I agree with, just because with grants, African countries have more of a breathing space to attend to pressing development needs as well as adapt to climate change.
All right, so then as we explore what alternatives and solutions also lie ahead, I mean, this is also part of what COP27 is all about. You, in your capacity, advocate for green bonds. I wonder if you could explain what that ultimately means. How so?
Right. Thanks for your question. So one of the points that was made at COP27 is that there is the need to close the climate adaptation finance gap. Therefore, innovative finance mechanisms are a channel through which funds can be transferred to climate adaptation projects. Some innovative finance mechanisms include green bonds, environmental impact bonds, debt for climate swaps, blended finance vehicles, and so on. Green bonds specifically are fixed income debt instruments that are used to raise money to finance climate projects. I advocate that the use of these innovative finance mechanisms should be scaled so that climate adaptation can be a reality in developing countries.
Now, Dr. Marie, in conclusion, a basic economic principle, Tanstaffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. In conclusion, are you convinced that there's going to be more action implementation as we near the conclusion of COP27? What are your expectations, both good and bad?
Right. I am not convinced that that there is really going to be much change. And what I would say is I am hopeful, right? Okay. Because as we all know, the multilateral process is not perfect, right? But hopefully there will be a little implementation here and there. And this time next year, we could be a little closer to the implementation of climate agendas. Right. And what I do hope as well is that developed countries would make good on their pledges to developing countries. That would be a good start.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Maria Oliedu, thank you very much for your time, academic and legal expert, weighing in on what has transpired to date at COP27. Of course, that continues this coming week. Really just exploring some of the themes emerging about where developing nations, really asking developed nations to take accountability and responsibility for the situation the world finds itself in. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, coming out to say that the world is on course to climate hell, but really the issue of a just transition coming through. Again, these and more that will be explored as the week continues, but we'll leave the conversation for now. Right, in other news now, on Thursday, there was traffic chaos in Johannesburg as striking members of the South African Municipal Workers Union blocked the major M1 motorway through the CBD, causing major rush hour delays. Our traffic in Pretoria was also affected as members of the Public Servants Association marched to National Treasury to hand over a memorandum of demands. The PSA members downed tools across the country protesting against government's 3% wage offer. They are not backing down in their demand for an inflation-linked wage increase. The industrial action by more than 230,000 public servants appears to have had minimal impact on government services.
The strike organizers were expecting to bring Home Affairs and Immigration Services to a halt. At the Beitbridge port of entry, operations went ahead as normal. However, at the Libombo border with Mozambique, trucks were stuck for hours. He says, I have been here since yesterday. I slept here. I'm not sure what's going on at the border, but someone told me there is one person working and I'm paid per load and I'm still here. In Durban, striking workers vowed to continue with the strike action until government gives in to their demands. And they want government to go back to the negotiation table. He says they are prepared to go back to the table to negotiate, while also saying that since President Ramaphosa came to power, they have not gotten a decent salary increase. And it was business as usual at the OR Tambo International Airport Immigration Services. In the nation's capital, Pretoria, workers marched to the offices of the National Treasury, where they handed over a memorandum of demands. The striking workers accused government of being arrogant.
We are dealing with a very, very arrogant government. When they come to power in 1994, they said that they are the government who listen to people. They said that they are government of the people. Are you seeing them as government of the people?
In the Western Cape, the union has labelled the expiry of the 1,000 Rand cash gratuity in March next year as a salary reduction. PSA and other FEDUSA-aligned unions marched to Parliament to hand over a memorandum of demands addressed to the President.
Effectively, from the 1st of April 2023, people will be getting a decrease in salary of 1,000 Rand. The other huge concern for us is the attack on collective bargaining. So the employer has stated in the media that they wish to bring into life a forum where salaries of public servants can be decided on afterwards. And the fact of the matter is collective bargaining is set there by the Labour Relations Act.
The Public Servants Association has given government 7 days to respond to its grievances or risk further disruptions to government services. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, so we continue with these and other stories on the other side. We'll be right back. Time for a quick break. Right, welcome back. The week in review continues. Now, the state of readiness for the ANC's elective conference, Integrity Commission's Phala report are expected to be key talking points at the ANC NEC meeting in Johannesburg. Just yesterday, the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa opened up about the scandal for the first time. He is reported to have voluntarily spoken about the matter in his political overview report at the opening of the meeting, and it's not clear whether this will end calls from NEC members such as Lindiwe Sisulu and Tony Yengeni for him to step aside. The former party president, Thabo Mbeki, has joined the meeting on his return from the Middle East. Another former party president, Jacob Zuma, is also expected to attend the meeting either today or tomorrow. But SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko is on the story and joins us now live from Nasrec, just south of Johannesburg. Samkele, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps you can briefly give us a recap already what transpired from that ANC NEC meeting yesterday. Today's day 2. What's the latest on your end as well?
as of this morning, they were still deliberating on the political overview that was given by the president of the ANC yesterday when he opened this meeting of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, which meets for the very first time in person since the COVID-19 pandemic. They have been in preparations for the 55th National Conference of the ANC. They are expected to receive the political report, which will be delivered to the 55th National Conference, and the organizational report and treasurer's report, which will be delivered by the various leaders of the ANC. The president will deliver the political report, the deputy president the organizational report on the virtue of the suspension of the secretary general of the ANC, and also the TG will deliver the treasurer's report. But I'm not alone. I am with the Limpopo ANC provincial secretary, Mr. Ruben Madaje, just to essentially speak on the processes leading up to the 55th National Conference. How ready are you as Limpopo, the ANC's third biggest province?
No, thank you very much. In terms of the percentage, we are the second biggest. We are at 90%. We are taking branches to conference. Well, the BGMs of the province were relatively stable. We have so far received only 12 disputes. We have dealt with 11. There is one appeal that we are awaiting the outcomes of the National Disciplinary Committee of Appeal, National Dispute Resolution Committee. But as things they are, the province is cruising well, very nicely.
When you look at the roadmap going towards this conference, there have been a number of proposals by province. We have been meeting various provinces. How far are you with those engagements with other provinces? Are you reaching any consensus around the leadership positions and composition of the leadership come the 55th National Conference?
Well, with regard to the issue of the consensus of the leadership, we are still engaging as provinces. One can't say that we are about to reach consensus. The provinces have got pieces, decisions. Even when you engage, like Limpopo, we reported progress in our last PEC meeting. We are still awaiting to have another engagement with the province of Eastern Cape. Remember, we met them, and the two provincial chairs feel like we must continue having discussions.
On the issues pertaining to the unsealing of the envelopes, some provinces have started unsealing those envelopes. As Limpopo, how far are you with that process? And will you be holding a provincial general council to consolidate those numbers of those branch nominations?
The province is going to start with its process of unsealing the envelopes on Monday at 10 o'clock, Franz Mukhala, in the presence of the Provincial Secretary's office, led by the Deputy Provincial Secretary, and all the regional secretaries and their managers, and the election agency. So we're going to start with that process on Monday, and then we'll be guided by the outcomes of the process to then go to the PGC for consolidation and subsequently for announcement.
On the issues pertaining to topical issues within the party, Limpopo has raised its dissatisfaction with the step-aside resolution, particularly after the effects it's had on some of the leaders within your province who had stepped aside for 2 years and further called upon to step aside, and later on were asked not to avail themselves for certain leadership positions. As a province, are you still adamant that the step-aside resolution must step aside in itself?
No, the issue is not about the step-aside resolution stepping aside. It's about its application. And that is what the province of Limpopo has been championing throughout, that we think the application has got eyes. We still maintain that the application has got eyes. There is nobody who has ever argued with us with regard to its application. Everybody agrees with us that what we are raising with regard to its application is fair, that the application has not necessarily been consistent. And that is our issue with the step aside. I think the issue about scrapping it and maintaining it is a discussion and debate for the national conference. Our issue is it's currently that we are raising. It's its application.
So in essence, you are saying that it can remain, but it must be applied fairly, and that it must not have eyes, and it must not have an effect that it chooses certain people and leaves others.
I think what we need to discuss and engage as structures of the ANC is the powers of the NEC with regard to its application and its changing of the guidelines with regard to its application. Because even if you maintain it, but if the NEC is going to sit and feel like there is one amongst themselves who can be in trouble with it and then change the rules, then its application will never be consistent. And that is the debate that we are saying to all of our structures. Let's engage in it. Let's see how we can then strengthen, because you must not confuse our stance with an issue that we want to promote corrupt individuals to continue within the organization, and also we don't want moral and ethical leaders. No, that's not our stand. Our stand is about its application and its consistency.
There's a topical issue ranging on right now around the issue that was raised in the political report of the president. It's a topical issue. As Limpopo, where do you stand in that discussion currently raging that speakers are currently discussing?
Which discussion, Samkel?
The discussion around whether the president should step aside or not.
No, the Limpopo has not even touched that item. We had a PEC 2 weeks back. We have not even reflected on that. And remember, I speak on behalf of the Provincial Executive Committee. I don't speak out my mind. When I'm here as the Provincial Secretary of the ANC in Limpopo. Now, if I confuse my views with the views of the PEC, I will be making a very big mistake. So Limpopo has never met and discussed the issue that we are talking about.
How is the campaign for Mr. Chupuma Tabata, a provincial chairperson, to be the national chairperson of the ANC?
We are cruising very well, and we are very happy about the nominations that the provincial chair of the ANC in Limpopo is getting throughout the country, not in Limpopo, throughout the country, and we are awaiting with bating breast the announcement of other provinces.
On the last issue, and I want to ask this one very politely.
Yes,
will you be raising the issue of Mr. Denim Caesar particularly being affected by the step-aside resolution? Because that was the main contention by Limpopo, and he had to recuse himself from contesting provincial secretary position for you to emerge.
Samkel, I speak on behalf of the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC in Limpopo. I don't have mandate specifically on a specific leader that I must go and raise it in the NEC or in the conference. Let's await our structures to mandate us properly so that we can take the matter forward.
Thank you very much. That is the Limpopo Provincial Secretary saying that he speaks on behalf of the party of Limpopo, and they have not engaged on other topical issues, particularly pertaining to how the president of the ANC must step aside or not, which is currently being debated in this National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, which is an issue that he raised on his own evolution, particularly after that judgment by the Integrity Commission of the party saying he must take the ANC's National Executive Committee into their confidence.
Mandela Maseko, of course, a developing story throughout the weekend. We'll continue to monitor it. Thank you very much for that update. Mandela Maseko is in Nasrec, south of Johannesburg, giving us an update where, a lot of important issues, including state of readiness for the ANC's elective conference, Integrity Commission's Pala report, as well as the step-aside rule, amongst many others, will be discussed throughout the weekend. And we'll continue to monitor it as it unfolds. Now, moving back to our earlier story, just yesterday, Johannesburg Mayor Dr. Mpho Palatse was whisked away after she failed to give workers an update regarding wages. Palatse told angry workers that her office would engage with SAMWU union leaders to discuss the implementation of a 2016 wage increase. Now, she was addressing angry municipal workers affiliated to the union who had blocked all roads in and around the Metro building in Braamfontein. But perhaps for this and more analysis on the impact of strikes we saw this week, we're going to be joined by Michael Bagram, a Labour analyst, joining us via Zoom. Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the Week in Review.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on air. I really appreciate it.
Let's weigh in on the activities of this week. On Thursday, the public service workers, embarked on a strike which led to traffic disruptions. And I wonder, how much of such can really help in workers achieving what they are demanding from their employers at this point of the negotiation process?
Well, as we saw on Thursday, it was a damn squib. It didn't actually affect it at all. You had a couple of marches in Pretoria, Johannesburg and Cape Town. But it didn't affect the civil servants. It was business as usual. I had colleagues of mine telling me that the service was as bad as normal. So I don't think we actually saw much happening. You might have noticed that, first of all, the services by most of the civil servants are essential services, so they have to keep a maintenance service going anyway. And of course, at the end of the day, there's certain people who can't strike, otherwise they risk being dismissed. What we've also seen, which is quite a shocker, is that both COSATU and SAFTU didn't join in. Although they had both been the saber rattling beforehand, they had both threatened to join with the civil servants, they didn't. I know that the civil service now has given the presidency a 7-day notice. They're saying increase our wages to 6.5% or else. The question is, or else what? They're on the strike. You've seen in your pictures and the video footage, there's not that many people. It is quite easy in the centers of cities to create traffic havoc, but it hasn't created anything much more than that. The real problem here is that the workers haven't really had much of an increase for the last 3 years. And in fact, they are going backwards. Now, the argument is on both sides is a good argument. The one side is saying, government saying we can't afford to give you more than 3%. On the other side, the unions are saying 3% gives us below inflation, so we're going backwards. And also, what did you do with the process strike? There was a demand for 6.5%. We went on strike, we made it hurt, and you then went to 6.5% from the 3%. So what are you doing to us? Why are you treating us any differently? I think at the end of the day, strikes doesn't help. It won't help South Africa. It won't help the workers, and it certainly won't help the unions. What we really need is we need to invoke the Labour Relations Act. We need to invoke Section 150, where you can call in the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation, Arbitration, the CCMA, get Advocate Moriani to actually put together a crack team to, first of all, have proper mediation, so you can take everyone's point of view into account without any emotion. And if that doesn't work, then go to actual arbitration, go to voluntary arbitration and find out what government can actually afford, find out what the bottom line is with the workers, and find a via media. We're destroying South Africa. This is the worst time for us to even face this. We're facing a grey listing. The economy is on its knees. We have almost 11 million people unemployed. The civil service is over bloated anyway. This is not helping anyone. It's a ridiculous situation where there's this mad standoff between the unions and government, and there's no love lost. You must understand that since the breach of the 3-year agreement by government, where the ANC then turned around and said, sorry, we know we signed, we know we agreed, but we're not paying you the increase, that's destroyed the trust between the trade union movement and government altogether. I'm not sure if it'll ever come back, that trust. So we're in an invidious situation here in South Africa.
You know, Michael, just as we look at some of the other dynamics, perhaps the impact on the broader society. I mean, you've spoken about how both sides have valid points, and you know, that breach of trust at this juncture of the negotiation process. And I wonder, the economy of the country is not performing well. And this is obviously also now forced workers to take to the streets because of rising costs of living. I just wonder if, in your view, is it justifiable for workers then to be taking to the streets, given the precarious situation in conclusion?
No, I don't think it is justifiable, but they are being used by the trade union movement. Unfortunately being used as cannon fodder, and it certainly isn't justifiable. But then you can't say either side is wrong. In fact, either side is right. And that's why you need that voluntary arbitration. You need an outsider, not government. You need outsiders to come in as experts and try and weigh up what is best for the people, the workers, what is best for government, and what is best for South Africa. Because in a juncture like this, we actually have to start thinking about our country. It can't be me. It has to be South Africa. And South Africa is at a crossroads right now. It's not like sometime in the future we're going to have problems. We're having problems now. There are people that are starving. And like I said, We've got the worst unemployment in history. It's probably the worst in the world. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because somehow either side can't see reasoning, and we need that third party to come in.
Yeah. All right, Michael Bagram, it's always a pleasure having you here. Thank you very much for weighing in on some of the labor issues coming to the fore again as the impact of strikes on the country. We explore that, obviously, on the back of what transpired this week. Michael Bagram, a labor analyst, joining us via Zoom for analysis. All right, in other news now, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, is in South Africa. She'll deliver the 20th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture at the Durban International Convention Centre today. Now, the theme for her lecture is social bonding and decolonization in the context of the climate crisis, perspectives from the Global South. But for more on this, let's bring in our reporter, Jade Lee-Polser. Good afternoon, Jade. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could walk us through what we actually can expect to come out of this lecture today.
Well, a very good afternoon to the viewers back at home, and I must say all eyes are on the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley. I am told that she has arrived in Durban. You would know that she arrived last night in Johannesburg, but she has flown into Durban, and you know, the atmosphere here is electrifying, and it just says that, you know, we are one, we are united, we are one nation. And I'm just speaking to people, asking them how do they feel about being in attendance of the 20th lecture, Nelson Mandela lecture. And many are saying that it comes at a time when this country, in particular South Africa, but also the African countries, need to hear what is going to be done about climate change. Now, like you said, the theme, quite a mouthful, social bonding and decolonization in the context of a climate crisis perspective from the Global South. Now, this is also at the backdrop of the climate conference that is taking place in Egypt here in Africa. We have seen many people from across the globe, heads of states, United America President Joe Biden, as well as our President Cyril Ramaphosa is in attendance. There are several other dignitaries that are at that climate change, looking at solutions and trying to find ways, mitigating means to fight climate change, but also find ways of how countries from first world countries can come together and put their money where their mouth is, try to find a way to ensure that people from all walks of life are able to get that relief fund when a natural disaster strikes. Now, I am joined by Selo Hatang. He is the CEO of the foundation. I just want to go straight into it. I know that you are very busy on the ground. Mr. Hatang, if we talk about the 20th edition of the Nelson Mandela Lecture, it's been running since 2003 when we saw the first lecture being given by the American President Bill Clinton. It's so far been every single year. How are we able to congregate as countries and as delegates to pay tribute to the big man that he is, the icon Madiba, but also listen to people come with critical issues in terms of social issues at the fore?
I think this is a very important moment for us as a country. The Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture tends to be able to get people to focus on South Africa for a minute, and where everybody is thinking, what's going on, what's the theme, and who is the speaker. And you ask the question, how come we still attract the kind of people that we do? The beauty of Madiba's legacy is it's not stagnant, is that it's not stagnant. It's relevant to the day-to-day needs of our people and issues that need to be discussed. Climate change was something that Madiba would have thought about in the 1950s as he was driving in the Free State, and he saw so much plastic, and he said, look, if we pollute so much, we might be damaging things that my grandchildren won't be able to enjoy the rivers that are flowing. Today, those rivers are dry. And if he could think about that without taking it as climate change, today we're saying it used to be something that we thought was in the future, now it's here.
And now having such an astute speaker, such as the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, coming to South Africa and coming into KwaZulu-Natal, I must bring it home here, after those devastating April and May floods that rocked the province. Her speaking about climate change at the backdrop of this, how important was it to bring the lecture to KZN?
You know, one of the things that the board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation didn't need to be convinced about was how we needed to be in solidarity with the people of KZN. We needed to show that this province is working, that our people need to be supported. And just recently, on Tuesday, we had another amount of water that just went through Msunduzi River. And I think if we are not careful, it means these things will occur so often that we must be ready. And I'm hoping that what Mia Mottley is going to do is to ensure that she challenges us to say having a plan is not enough. What do we need to do more as the Global South to do to ensure that we mitigate the effects of climate change? We are hoping that you will also pass on a message to say the Global North cannot treat the Global South as a matter of a point of discussion, but actually to say they are party to it. We are party to it. We are at the table. And that the kind of fund that she's been advocating for, she will emphasize it here to say they need to also be paying into that fund, because if they don't, it means that countries such as Kenya, I don't know if you are aware that in Kenya at the moment, they're struggling with drought. The drought they haven't had in one region where they lost 100 elephants. Now, why would we even think that we can do something about climate change in the future when it's already here? And I'm hoping that she's going to inspire us, as she's inspired us when she arrived yesterday, that each one of us can do differently.
You know, at COP26, she was also saying that more needs to be done. It's true what you're saying about the North coming to the party and assisting the Global South, because it is in the South where we're seeing so much devastation taking place when it comes to climate change. We're talking about poverty alleviation. We're talking about the fact that there are still many communities that are living below the breadline, and with inflation rising, climate change is only worsening the situation. But now at COP27, there are talks that there needs to be more of a commitment. As the foundation, and I'm sure you've been in talks with her, what is her views of the foundations, as well as the private sector coming on board and also committing and pledging to assisting in the fight against climate change?
You know, one of the things that I think she's good at is ensuring that the Global South doesn't act like a victim all the time. That we ensure that we understand that actually we have agency too. There's some things we can do, and as the private sector, as the civil society, we can do something, and we must do something. Mitigating against this will mean that, like we did in July, you'd remember that we made an undertaking that will plant 1 million trees. Now, it means that each one of us has to then say, as a corporate, like Old Mutual Foundation did, pledging 100,000 trees here, 200,000 trees there, each one of us must then do that. Next year will be a big year for us as the foundation. We'll be marking the 10th anniversary of Madiba's passing. How do we then ensure that that legacy is not a legacy of the past? We don't reminisce about a legacy that's gone by, but we're saying that legacy we own today, and it will change the lives of those who are still to be born to be better.
Before I let you go, Mr. Hetang, like you said, it's the 10th year next year. It's been the 20th lecture this year. If Madiba was here and if he had to speak about climate change, as a foundation, what do you think the core issues that he would possibly bring out and possibly also add to this crisis that we are faced with?
You know, I think I never like speaking for Madiba, but the reflection that I gave of him driving from Johannesburg to Knysna, and along the way reflecting that there's so much pollution that's there, and that pollution means that we are not doing our bit, we are not playing our part. And like Archbishop Tutu said as well, that South Africans can win an Olympic gold on polluting the environment. And I think we need to be doing more as a country. And I'm urging people to say, in the name of Madiba, let's invoke that name to say we will do better. We'll look better at our water resources. We won't damage the infrastructure that's there to protect the people. That we will have regular inspections of dams. That dams will end up being the very source of danger to people because of them not being regulated with the floods that we already have. So there are some things we can do better, and we don't have to rely on government only. Each one of us can do something.
Mr. Hatang, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. Well, that was Selo Hatang. He is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Just speaking ahead of that lecture that will be taking place, the Nelson Mandela lecture, and the keynote speaker for this year is Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. As he said there, it starts with you and I. What can we do to help fight climate change? Now, we know it is a broad topic. How do we fight climate change? It's not like gender-based violence. Where do we even start? But it starts with us making sure that we look after our rivers, our streams, our oceans. It's very exciting here as we see the people flocking in. I did see Mandla Mandela also making his way with his wife here. We've seen several people arriving, but we are still waiting for the lady of the moment, Miss Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados. She will be delivering that keynote address at 3 o'clock this afternoon. It's back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Jade, for that update. Waiting anticipation as the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture is set to kick off a little later today. They're taking place at the ICC in Durban. Again, as Jade alluded to, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, set to deliver the 20th edition. Again, a developing story we'll continue to monitor throughout the week. For now, let's leave that conversation there. And on another note, let's now take a look at some of your top stories that emerged this week.
The DA's Tanya Campbell was re-elected as Ekurhuleni mayor. This follows her ousting in a motion of no confidence on the 26th of October.
Maybe I was a bit cheeky to say I will see you again, but I did have an inclination because this motion was frivolous. It had very little basis to it, and also it was a personal attack, and it was a personal interest from the ANC.
We lost with our pride and dignity intact because what we cannot allow is to be dictated to by anybody for any reason, and is to be treated as if we're not a very serious party. The ANC is a very big organization.
On Wednesday, the Mpumalanga High Court sentenced 21-year-old serial rapist and murderer Nhlanhla Mlotshwa to 4 terms of life imprisonment for 2 counts of rape and 2 counts of murder.
Section 51, Act 105 of 1997, the accused is sentenced to life imprisonment. On count number 2, murder, read with the provision of Section 51, Act 105 of 1997, the accused is sentenced to life imprisonment.
The Simaila family wants the 32-year-old accused of murdering her 4 children to be released, saying she's mentally ill. The incident occurred at Nzabala village at Ngobo in the Eastern Cape this week.
In this entire land of Amakwati, we've never heard of or seen this horrible act. It is the first time I saw it with my naked eye. We usually read about these things on the newspapers and see them on TV, but this time it happened here.
She's a good person, more than me. I never thought she can do this. I wish she can be released or social workers can take her so that she can be monitored.
Residents of Sunrise Park and Popomolife Informal Settlement have urged the Rustenburg local municipality in the northwest to consider upgrading infrastructure to avoid possible disasters when it rains. The Park de Graal dam wall collapsed, causing flooding of a local low-lying bridge and some internal roads.
It's worrisome because even learners use this bridge to go to school. How will the situation be should it rain again?
Our municipality must do something because this is dangerous.
We are scared that children and vehicles may be swept away.
We dispatched our disaster management team with the objective to come and take charge, take control of the situation of the environment, amongst others, meaning to block people, to stop people from crossing the bridge, as you see the one behind us here.
Meanwhile, residents of Peace Valley and Pietermaritzburg in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands are also dealing with floods. In the area alone, more than 35 families have been affected.
I tried to climb to the top of the roof, but that didn't work. As the house was flooded, we eventually escaped through the window and we sought refuge from our neighbor whose house was not flooded. Due to land disputes in other areas, we are unable to settle in those areas. We lost all our valuables. We are requesting government to provide us with alternative accommodation or find us a plot of land where we can build our own houses.
What we need to do as government is that at all times we need to be studying our purchase, but also we need to be looking at areas that are prone to this flooding and ensure that we build either walls or infrastructure that will prevent any such destruction that we see sometimes.
All right, so those will look at some of your top stories this week. In other news now, motorists are turning to the used and retraded tyre market to frequently replace tyres damaged by potholes. The current wet weather has worsened the country's roads, causing more damage to vehicles. The high costs of new tyres and fuels have seen a shift to the second-hand tyre market. But motorists are now being warned that using second-hand tyres can in fact be dangerous.
The current steep increases in the cost of living in South Africa has triggered a boom in the second-hand tyre market. Cash-strapped motorists can no longer keep up with the regular tyre replacements caused by poor road conditions. Tsepo Dube is owner of Kido Road Assist and says demand for his services have tripled due to the heavy downpours.
A second-hand tyre, it's reasonable when you buy it, because most people, they'll be changing 4 tyres at once, only to find 2 tyres are still in good condition. That's where the second-hand tyre comes in. So that's where we also improvise in getting those good used second-hand tyres so that we can resell them. But then you must be very careful when you are purchasing a second-hand tyre. At times you don't even see the smallest leak on the tyre. That's the whole damage of the tyre.
Although this may be a viable option, the Tyre Equipment Parts Association TIPA has warned of the dangers that come with driving with a second-hand set of tyres.
I really want to ask the public to think twice before buying a second-hand tyre next to the road or without an invoice. You have no way of knowing where these tyres come from, how long they've been standing there exposed to the elements, whether these tyres are the correct load and speed rating for your car even. Some unscrupulous dealers have been found selling snow tyres or retreads, which may be illegal for your car. The legal limit of a tyre is 1.5 millimeters. So if you buy a tyre of, for example, 3 millimeters tread remaining, are you really getting such a bargain?
One of the biggest insurers, Hollard, has announced plans to scrap some of its tyre insurance offers. This is because it simply cannot keep up with the number of claims. Car analysts say although using second-hand tyres look like a viable option in the current tough economic times, it is risky and can affect one's insurance claims in case of an accident.
With the rising cost of living, there's pressure on households to save money, and one of the areas that they might potentially cut back on is pushing the replacement time of their tires out. And potentially, you could find yourself in a situation where your tire is not only dangerous, but it's actually technically illegal. You can get fined if the tire tread is below the tire wear indicator, and potentially, if you are in an accident, your insurance company might reject your claim if they deem the tire to be unroadworthy.
Tyres have a warranty of 5 years, and experts say anything older than that could see one having trouble with insurance companies. The government has also been urged to consistently maintain roads to prevent potholes. But it's clear that provinces and municipalities are unable to keep up with the pace of the number of new potholes. SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We are back hopefully tomorrow for a look at the week ahead. But for myself, Liesl Wilson and the rest of the team, until then, do take care, stay safe. It's goodbye for now.